Smile. I hope we did it. You're live.
Wine? Not vodka. Arak or wine? Arak is wine.
You can give it a real cup. No, I'm saying you can give the mashka in a real cup. This is for women.
Oh,
You're on.
Guys have this too. Sorry. The Minhagim.
And for drivers.
Why don't we have where are all our locals? You took a picture already. How'd you do that?
Okay, as soon as you're ready, I'll turn the music off. Give me 1 moment.
You did it already.
Okay, l'chaim l'vrachat everybody. In case anyone was not informed, we have an itinerary for tonight. It's a little unusual of a Farbrengen. A Farbrengen is usually above Shah. The itinerary that we plan for tonight, we usually have a Tuesday night Shiur in Halachos. And we actually just started a new series, which is basically that we, Emir Hashem, with God's help, plan on going through the entire Shulchan Aruch from the beginning till the last chapter in Choshen Mishpat. May God help us go through it. And we started last week. Last week we went through the first Simmons and an Aleph, and obviously this is not going to happen overnight, but this is the usual time it takes place in. Everyone who does not yet know about this year, we are letting you know it is extremely important to participate. I don't know for a fact, but this is most likely the only English year going through the entire Shulchan Aruch in Shvat, the city of the Shulchan Aruch. Maybe even the only one in Hebrew. Okay, if anyone can double check that for me. But in any event, it's a very special shiur that you have the ability, responsibility, and capability of doing what a Jew is supposed to do and be an expert in Jewish law. So that's the time set that we usually spend for the Tuesday night. Tonight, because of the great Yom HaElula and the Yom HaNasiyas of the Rebbe, we are altering the schedule a little bit. So what we're going to be doing is for the first half hour, give or take, we're going to go through some Halachos and Minhagim relating to Yartzeit, and then we're going to start Farbrengen the Kavod Yud Shvat. So before we begin, I'll make mention that there's a sefer that I've been working on for about 3 to 4 years on the laws of Avelos, the laws of mourning. It's a sefer on the one hand, you never want it to become applicable. On the other hand, in the past, it's applicable. So it's something you need to finish, something you need to do so people know what to do. One of the first organized books that was written on Avelos on mourning was by the Gavriel Tzina, the Baal Mitzvah Gavriel, in New York, and he asked the Rebbe this same question. He was in a dilemma: should I write a book on it? Should I not write a book on it? You don't want to deal with a taboo subject, death, mourning. To write a book on it means you're spending a nice amount of years on the subject. That's quite morbid, especially for a chassid. So he wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe replied to him that since this is Maisim B'chol Yom, unfortunately the Chevra Kadisha is still in business. Therefore, you should write a book on it, and matoiv if you can get it translated to English. So I can proudly announce today, Bashkacha Pratis, the 2-volume book on the laws of mourning in English was completed today. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Now we're starting the editing process, but the writing process was completed, Baruch Hashem, today. Okay, so may nobody ever need it. May the writing of the book make the shilas unnecessary, because you've already done the shilas of it. Okay, that's my blessing to everyone. Yud Shvat, as we know, is on the one hand, it's the day of the Yartzeit and Stalkus of Rabbi Yatz, so it's at least for the Chassidim, the direct Chassidim of Rabbi Yatz, it was quite a sad day, a day where, they were shocked, their lives changed. We're more the indirect Chassidim of the Rebbe Rayatz. We're more like the grand Chassidim, like grandchildren. We're not as much emotionally affected by the Yartzeit aspect. We more emphasize the idea of the beginning of the Rebbe's leadership. But we will Farbrengen about this later on, the 2 different points. But in honor of the Yartzeit, we're going to give a class now for, as I said, give or take about a half hour on the Minhagim and Halachos that are kept for a Yartzeit. This applies to a Yartzeit of a parent, Rachmana litzlan, for those who it's relevant for, and as well for the Yartzeit of a tzaddik, of a Rebbe, as we follow today on Yud Shvat and Gimel Tammuz. So the source of a Yartzeit, where does it come from? First, where does the word come from? The word is a Yiddish word. The word Yartzeit is a Yiddish word, and very interestingly, is used in the entire Jewish world, even the Sephardim. When you speak to them in Yiddish, they think you're speaking, not Arabic, because they know Arabic, but they think you're speaking some strange language, maybe German. They don't understand Yiddish. But they use the term Yartzeit. And in fact, we find in Svarim that a number of Sephardi, Mizrahi Jews from previous generations tried to understand what this word means. They wrote all these pshatim and what Yartzeit means. And the Ben Ishchai writes, guys, you got it all wrong. This is a Yiddish word. You made all these Kabbalistic meanings behind the word. This is a Yiddish word. It simply means the time of the year. That's what the Ben Ishchai writes. He says it's a Yiddish borrowed word that we Sephardim have borrowed. But anyways, the term has been used throughout, for, I guess, many centuries already, and is used throughout the world to refer to the day of the passing of the relative or the tzaddik, etc. So where does it come from? Where does the concept of a Yartzeit that we commemorate the day of the passing of a loved one or of a tzaddik, what is its source? So we find, we don't find it discussed in the Talmud directly. The Talmud doesn't really have Yartzeits discussed there, but we do find it discussed in the later Rishonim. The Rishonim discuss the customs relating to a Yartzeit from various different aspects and angles. For example, we have Rashi, who is commenting on the Gemara in Yevamis, that the Tanaim went to a certain party by a certain grave, and Rashi explains, the custom was that on the day of the passing of one of the Ameiraim, one of the Tanaim, they would come and make a Yom HaYilula. That's actually our first source of the idea of A, commemorating the day of the passing, and B, being happy, having simcha, a Yom HaYilula, which is from the wording of joy. The other Rishonim that deal with it from 2 different minhagim. One is fasting. A lot of the Rishonim discuss the custom to fast on the day of a Yartzeit, and while probably all of you are thinking, what is he talking about? I've never fasted on the day of any Yartzeit, not a Rebbe, not a parent for those relevant. Right? Has anyone here ever fasted on the day of a Yartzeit? So we are post-Baal Shem Tov generation Yidden, so therefore we no longer fast. But if you go back 300 years ago, then absolutely The day of a Yartzeit was a day of fasting. The day of your Rebbe's Yartzeit was a day of fasting. If Yud Shvat would have happened 200 years ago, people Chassidim would be fasting today. But the fast, as the Baal Shem Tov's Torah spread about the requirement of happiness and joy, and as the Rebbe writes, that the Baal Shem Tov fixed the need or necessity to fast, meaning that those tikkunim, those matters of the soul and avodas Hashem, the need to be fixed through fasting, the Baal Shem Tov took care of, and now we can fix it through making a chayim.
Family bracha.
That's the idea that on a Yartzeit, it's customary for the Baal Yartzeit to give some schnapps and give some mezainis, after davening. It's a Chassidish minhag. The minhag never used to be that way. All Klal Yisrael would fast on the day of the Yartzeit, of their relatives, of their parents' Yartzeit, or their relatives' Yartzeit. But by Chassidim, and now it's in the whole world today, very few people fast on the day of the Yartzeit. So it's called a tikkun. Yeah. It's mitaken what the fast would have been mitaken. So what we should have been mitaken through fasting, we're now mitaken through eating. It's a good deal. So that's the original discussion of the Yartzeit in the Rishonim, and likewise we have another discussion found in the early Poskim, and these are the two main Minhagim that we find regarding the Yartzeit. The one regarding fasting, as I mentioned, and regarding lighting a candle. Lighting a Yartzeit candle is something that Jews all over the world, from all dominations, they keep to very strongly. They'll never miss the Yizkor candle. They'll never miss the Yartzeit candle. They'll feel actually very bad if they forget to light it. And this didn't start today. We have the Rashal, Rabbi Shlomo Luria, who lived in the 1500s, already discussed this minhag. And he says the following, that it's become such a necessity for the Jewish people to light a Yartzeit candle the day of the Yartzeit, that if it's, let's say the Yartzeit's on Shabbos, and you forgot to light it before Shabbos, so if it's still before nightfall, 3 stars, you can call a guy, you can get your guy Yishamei to light it for you. This is a heter that we only give for major things, important mitzvahs, like you forgot to light Shabbos candles, you can have a guy light one candle for you. But it extends even to a Yartzeit candle, as he writes that we have accepted it as such a matter of importance. His ruling is recorded in all the Poskim, the Magen Avraham, the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishnah Berurah.
Who said it? It's Barshan?
The Rashal, Shlomo Luria, yeah. So this is a very old custom that we keep till this very day, which, as we said, started way back then. And the meaning behind the candle, which we of course also keep by a Rebbe's Yartzeit, according to the instructions of the Rebbe, we should have lit a Yartzeit candle today after Shkia. Whoever did not, as soon as you get home, light a Yartzeit candle. The idea of the candle is not just to make us feel good that we're doing something, It has real impact and effect. As the neshama is attracted to light. Just like Lahavdal of Havdalas, life surrounds light. We see animals, we see insects, we see people. Where there's light, people come. So too neshamas want light. And when you light a candle for a certain neshama's merit, it attracts that neshama. It's a type of attraction you can't bring just by inviting the neshama or talking about the neshama. It's a special attraction that can only be done through lighting a candle. And that's why we are accustomed to light a Yartzeit candle to help the neshama be with us, or for us in the case of a tzaddik, for us to gain from the neshama's spirit, from the tzaddik's spirit.
Is this related to the bracha of Yartzeit, that we ask Hashem to accept our fire, the Isha Yisrael, the candles before, from the Chazan, as well as Yartzeit candles?
Well, it's an interesting point. I haven't seen any connection there made, but if it doesn't hurt, you can interpret it that way in addition. Right? There's many interpretations. Shivim panim l'Torah, so it's possible. You could also include it. In simple terms, we would say the Chalitzei when we say about accepting our fire, it's referring to the fire of our love. But we can have it attached to other things as well. Okay, so what's the reason behind what happens on the day of the Yartzeit to the neshama or to us that we do something to commemorate it? What's the reason behind all the customs we just mentioned and the ones we're going to mention very soon? So the Rishonim discuss this, and they write 2 reasons. One reason is because when it comes to the Yartzeit of a parent, So, of an individual who's not a tzaddik, the neshama goes through a judgment every single year, annually on the day of its passing. The same way the day of its passing represented a judgment, that it was judged that he should be taken from earth on that day. And so too yearly there is a judgment that occurs with the neshama on the day of the Yartzeit. To alleviate the judgment, to make it be more chesed, to make it be more kind and less severe, we, the descendants, take upon ourselves all these mourning customs which alleviates the judgment. That's the reason why we keep mourning customs throughout the year as well, throughout Shivat. There's two reasons mentioned. One reason is to alleviate the judgment of the neshama. Another reason brought down is because on the day of a Yartzeit, the day of a Yartzeit of a parent, since on that day, Ra'o Mazle, his mazel was weakened, his father passed away, or his mother passed away, so there's a little bit of danger in it for him as well. And because of that, it was customary to fast. The fast and many other customs that we're going to bring were there to help protect the descendant, the child, from that danger. And that's why it used to be, I don't know about today, people do this anymore, but people would not travel on the day of the Yartzeit due to fear. Just like you don't travel during the 9 days, people wouldn't travel on the day of the Yartzeit because of the danger aspect.
It's also a situation when the judgment comes to the person who passed. Is the judgment on what happened in the past year or their whole life? So
You know, that's a great question, and I don't have knowledge of that. I don't.
Repeat it.
He asks if the yearly judgment is on a person's entire life or just on a past year. What generally is explained is that the judgment is on. It's not a new judgment. You don't get judged for the same crime twice, just like in the States. But it's the judgment is, can he move on to the next level? Also a tzaddik, we mentioned before. Tzaddik doesn't necessarily have a judgment about Gan Eden or Gehenim, but the tzaddik is getting a judgment, should he be in, first class box seats or first class maybe 3 rows back. It's a judgment regarding how up he's going to be. So there's always an elevation and a judgment of where the tzaddik will go on the day of the Yartzeit.
Why are they scared again on the day of the Yartzeit?
Who's scared?
Because they don't want to graduate, they're scared?
Right, because one of the reasons of fasting and other Minhagim is because the mazel of the individual was worsened on this day. His father and mother passed away, right?
It's only father and mother?
A Yartzeit is only by father and mother or one's Rebbe,
Huh?
or a Rebbe, your Rebbe, a person's Rebbe.
Yes. And then there's...
Uh-huh.
And then there's I'm a grandfather today.
A what?
Oh, it's also grandfather?
It is. You could keep. There are some customs that you can decide to keep for a grandfather, like davening for the Amid. If you don't have a father, davening for the Amid. But the main ideas that we're discussing are specific to children and to students of the Amid.
What do you think the mazel would be better? Because the father and mother are around to help protect everyone.
That's what it says. Okay, we're going to now go through a number of halachos and minhagim, and we're going to start through Farbrengen. The first thing that a person has to verify when he's discussing minhag Yartzeit is, when is the Yartzeit? Now that may sound like a little bit of a strange question. Everyone, I think, knows and has documented the day of their parents or relatives passing. We have death certificates. It's very easy to find out. So what is there to verify exactly? So the truth is that there are a lot of circumstances that can enter into question when the date is. Such as, for example, if a person passed away bein hashmashos, the person passed away between sunset and nightfall, which here in Israel you only have a 20-minute gap, but in other places of the world you can have a 40, 50-minute gap. So which day is it? So that's a real question. It's not clear which day the person's Yartzeit is, and actually it's brought in place, and you should keep 2 days. Sfeika Dayayim, you keep 2 Yartzeit, a 2-day Yartzeit. And likewise there's a discussion if you follow the day of burial or the day of death. The Rebbe Rayatz passed away today, Yud Shvat, but he was only buried the next day, Yud Aleph Shvat. So while there is a discussion of which day you should follow for the Yartzeit, until burial, nothing happens with the neshama. The reason why we are so particular in Judaism that to make sure the burial happens right away is because the tikkun for the neshama cannot begin until burial takes place. So it's like a limbo state for the neshama. So some say, therefore, we should follow the day of burial when the tikkun began, when the elevation began. Bottom line is, as the Rebbe Rayatz himself directed, we always follow the day of death. We always follow the day of death by the Yartzeit. And it was also by the Rebbe Rayatz's mother who passed away, was buried a few days after she passed away. He directed to, even the first year, you follow it on the day of death. But there are other customs that would follow in the first year, the day of burial. Other case examples where things get complex is if you're in a different time zone. If your relative passed, if a person's relative passes away, let's say, in the States and they are in Israel, so there's a 7-hour difference for you, it may be already the next date. So when's the Yartzeit? Do you go by him or do you go by, who do you go by? So these are questions that come up in determining the date. There's, of course, leap year questions, which are very confusing. You know, there's, the Jewish calendar has dates in it that aren't repeated in other years. So just for example, the 30th of Cheshvan or the 30th of Kislev, not always are those repeated every year. So those are all cases where a question to a Rav would be necessary to verify when to keep the Yartzeit. One of the main Yartzeit laws brought in Shulchan Aruch is mourning. So children, specifically the children, the sons and the daughters of the parent who passed away on that day, the day of the Yartzeit, they are obligated to keep certain mourning laws. This is according to Ashkenazi custom, not Sephardi custom, but Ashkenazi custom. What mourning laws do they keep? It's very limited. There's only one law that they keep, and that is not to participate in weddings or Shevat brachos. In a very festive occasion, such as a wedding or a Shevat brachos or a concert, not to listen to music. That's what it's limited to. Other types of festivities, Pidyon Haben, a Bris Milah, or even Sudas Mereyim, a feast that you're having with friends, that is all okay. The limitation is specifically on going to a wedding on that day. As I said, 2 reasons. One is based on to alleviate the judgment, and second, because of the sakana that we mentioned. Because of the once upon a time a custom fast day, since it became abolished, it became customary to do a Siyum Masechta on the day of the Yartzeit. One of the reasons for that is that when you do a Siyum Masechta, we're all familiar with the custom of Tainis B'cheres, or Erev Pesach. What do the firstborns do to get out of fasting? They do a Tainis, or they participate, they do a Siyum, or they participate in one. So too, in order for us to exempt the fast, according to everyone, we go ahead and we make a Siyum Masechta. Now the good news is that anyone's father who did them the favor of leaving the world on a day that you don't have to fast, that means they don't have to learn a Masechta every year. So if a person's parent passed away, for example, during days that Tachanun isn't recited, such as in the month of Nisan, or on a Yantif, or the days between Yom Kippur and Sukkot, so they never have to do a Siyum Masechta because they never have to fast. You don't fast on the day that you can't say Tachanun. So that's my father passed away, Alav Shalom, on Yud Gimel Tishrei, so I don't have to do a Siyum Masechta ever for the day of the Yartzeit. There's another reason though that's brought down, and that is to turn the day of the Yartzeit, which is really a sad day, to a day of Simcha. And as Chassidim, since we're making a Chaim, so we also have to have Simcha P'Torah, so therefore we make Siyum Masechta. When a Yartzeit falls on Shabbos, the Rebbe discussed something interesting. The Rebbe said when a Yartzeit falls on Shabbos, when his father's Yartzeit, or Shvat would fall on Shabbos, so the Rebbe said that we shouldn't make a Siyum Masechta. Why? Because if you make a Siyum Masechta on Shabbos, it's as if you're saying, if not for the Siyum, I would have to fast. And of course on Shabbos it's forbidden to fast. So if you not give any room for the fast day at all, so the Rebbe said it's better not to make a Siyum Masechta at all that year on Shabbos. If you want, you can do so a different day, or not do so at all. One of the Minhagim that's actually not recorded in the classical sources, but is very well known, is to visit the coven, to visit the grave, the graveyard, to visit the grave of the deceased, and to daven there. And there's different procedures of what's done at the graveyard, what the different tefillos that are said, different tefillos of Tehillim. We're not going to go into that now. We'll just discuss it in general, this minhag. The minhag of visiting kvarim is a very, very old custom, written about in the Talmud, written about in the Zohar in length. And really the nakuda, the idea of this custom is for us to be permeated with the knowledge that the dead people are not really dead. They've just moved to a different reality, but they're not really dead. They're around. And when a person comes to the grave, he's not coming just to a place of stone, to a tombstone. The neshama, the soul, hears and doesn't exactly talk back. If you hear neshama's talking back to you, speak to your doctor, but nonetheless...
Why? It's recorded that there's plenty of evidence. That's not the case. It's not a raw nerve, it's the emes.
So when the emphasis of visiting a graveyard is for a person to believe in Tchias HaMesim, but even believe in the eternality, in the fact that a soul is eternal, and a soul is not something that passes away with the body. And we find, due to this, a whole discussion in Poskim regarding, the Isser called Deir Shel HaMesim, that a person is not allowed to exhume, he's not allowed to do what's called necromancy, to exhume the soul of the dead and talk to the soul. And that's an Isser Min HaTorah. So the Poskim discuss, so how then can you visit a kever? How can you ever pay a visit to Kvarim? And because of this, you have Jews who don't. The Marami Noshtait writes that you shouldn't visit Kvarim. It's a problem. Deir Shel HaMesim. You're doing necromancy. You're searching and seeking the souls of the dead. But as the Poskim who bring him point out, this is not the custom. This is not the conclusion. This is not the way we rule. And rather, it is permitted for a person to visit, and it is customary to visit the grave of a tzaddik or the grave of a loved one. And in fact, the Beis Yosef even writes that if you know how to speak to the soul through ways of kedusha, you're allowed to do so. He brings a famous story in the Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara there says a pretty funny story. There was a what's called chassid echad, a certain chassid, a pious man who had a wife that caused him a lot of agmas nefesh, a lot of problems, and he ran away from home. Now this chassid who ran away from home for the night, he didn't run away forever, just for the night. He wanted to sleep elsewhere. His wife threw him out. So where did he go to sleep? In the graveyard, in the cemetery. He went to sleep in the cemetery. And he's sleeping in the cemetery, and he overheard Shnei Ruchas Masapar Zulazu, two souls talking to each other, and he overheard some very interesting information. So it says, came the next year, he did it again. He went again, and he heard a lot of more interesting information. And the place would discuss, how is it allowed for him to do so, to go and listen to souls? What about the Isser of diplomacy? So there's a few different answers. One answer, the Beis Yosef gives a very interesting kind of funny answer, which he says that his wife threw him out again. The next year, his wife threw him out again, another time. So he was sleeping there again. It wasn't his fault. But the main approach over there is that if a person doesn't come and does kishuf and does the impure method of speaking to the soul, then it is permitted to be done. Now, we don't have that access. Maybe some people do, but most of us don't have that access to speak to these neshamas. But nonetheless, the tzaddikim do. And we know that when the Rebbe would go to the Ayho, the Rebbe would have conversations. The Rebbe would report back to people with answers from the Rebbe Rayatz. The Rebbe Rayatz told me this, the Rebbe Rayatz directed me this, the Rebbe Rayatz answered to me this for you. It wasn't something of bragging rights, it was just a matter of fact that the Rebbe went to the Ayho and had a conversation with the Rebbe Rayatz. And this idea is, as we said, some people ask, well, how can the Rebbe, or how can anyone go to a kever? But the Rebbe used to spend a lot of time. The Rebbe would go almost every Erev Chodesh to the Oyel of the Rebbe Rayatz. And the answer is because for a tzaddik, they have, that is their direct line of connection. That is their telephone, their satellite connection with the neshama of the tzaddik. I just want to say a maisa. There was a maisa that happened. It needs to be properly confirmed, but this is the story that I've heard. In the 1970s, it was 1978, as we know, there was Miftzei Teva, which saved the Israelis that were held captive on the Ein Tevi plain that was taken over by terrorists. So after that whole miraculous event where the Israeli soldiers came and they saved the captives and they released them, so the Rebbe spoke a sicha and a Farbrengen about the necessity to thank Hashem for the miracle. It's a mitzvah for a person to thank God when a miracle has happened. Baruch she'asa nisim. So Rebbe discussed the necessity of saying a bracha for either Baruch she'asa nisim or Shechianu. Rebbe didn't ask him to say it, but he discussed back and forth. Is this a mitigating circumstance? In any event, there were some kanoim, some zealous individuals. When they heard this, anything that has to do with the Zionist state must be evil. How can a rabbi say that you should bless on this, something evil done by the Zionist state? And these individual hotheads, to prove their point, went and did something very defiling to the kever of the Rebbe Rayatz, to the tzion of the Rebbe Rayatz. What's said that they did is that they brought dogs over there to use the kever as a rescue. When news of this got back to the Rebbe was shocked. The Rebbe was shocked. And the Rebbe spoke at a Farbrengen, and this is printed. The details aren't printed, but this part is it's printed in a Sefer HaSichos Tafshin Ches. That in the Farbrengen a few weeks later, the Rebbe spoke about how there was once an individual who treated the resting place of the Rebbe Rashab without its due respect. He was referring to the guard of the cemetery of Rostov. And unfortunately, he passed away, a Misa Meshumen, a very strange death. He passed away a strange death. That's what the Rebbe said. So the Rebbe said, whoever did this action to the tzion of the Rebbe Rayatz, they should go right away, immediately, and ask for forgiveness. As chas v'shalom, they're playing with fire is a great danger upon those individuals. So some of those individuals took the Rebbe seriously, and the way the story goes, they went and they asked for the mechila, but others did not. And the end of the story was not a very happy ending, but it emphasizes here the idea that of the communication that the Rebbe had with the Rebbe Rayatz. A few weeks later, or whenever it was, the Rebbe asked Rabbi Chodakov to call a certain individual who was affiliated with Lubavitch, who was a Shevat, and tell him that the Rebbe told him that he shouldn't go to the Shechita that night. They were going to travel to do a Shechita in Pennsylvania. He said he shouldn't go, he shouldn't travel. He didn't. He listened to the Rebbe. But those who did, unfortunately, got into a car crash. And there were injuries, whatever. There were casualties in the car crash. Yeah. Amongst the casualties of Chwana Litzlan were the ringleaders of this fest that took place a few months earlier on the Rebbe Rayatz's grave. The Rebbe was greatly pained by this, and Chassidim, or Rabbi Chodakov, whoever it was, they asked the Rebbe, why didn't you tell everyone not to go? You basically saved this individual's life. Why didn't you tell everyone not to go? So the Rebbe said, I did not know that there was going to be a crash. The Rebbe Rayatz told me to tell this chassid not to go. So I told this chassid not to go. And he didn't go. So this was number one. We see from here the importance of the respect for a Beis HaChaim, especially the tzion, the resting place of a tzaddik, that it's as great as is its advantage of praying there, so too is the disrespect held much more greatly if a person chas v'shalom doesn't ask respectfully in a tzion. But we also see from here how the communication that to tzaddikim, even after the death, are considered alive, and by the Rebbe's relationship with Rebbe Rayatz was very alive even after Yud Shvat, to the point that he would tell Chassidim different directives based on the Rebbe Rayatz. Yeah.
Is there a mission that says specifically that there's covered be given to the Kisvei Kodesh and the dead and the Zikanim and then your parents? It's like an order of covenant. I think the highest up there is the debt, is the basic price.
I'm not aware of that, but it is written in the Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, Chavi Beis Chaim is written.
I think it's.
Okay, we're gonna summarize now. We're gonna conclude. We're gonna summarize a few, concluding Minhagim, and then we're gonna begin with the break. It's customary the Shabbos beforehand to get the Aliyah of Mafter. This is not recorded in the earlier poskim. It's first recorded in the Chidah that the son receives Mafter in the shul before the Yartzeit, the Shabbos before the Yartzeit. Not everyone is accustomed to this minhag. Some get Shvi, some get Shlishi. Amongst Chabad, our custom is to get specifically Mafter, but if it's not available, it's nothing to make a fight over, as the Chassam Sofer says. Fighting over aliyahs causes a yerida to the neshama, so that's kind of counterproductive. So you shouldn't never fight over aliyahs. It's always good to be mevater. And as well, before the Yartzeit of a tzaddik, of our Rebbe, we also get an aliyah the Shabbos before. That's why we all got an aliyah on this past Shabbos. It's customary to hold a kiddush and shul on the Shabbos of before the Yartzeit. Likewise, as we mentioned earlier, on the day of the Yartzeit, we make a l'chaim. We are accustomed in Chabad to say 16 Kadeshim on the day of the Yartzeit. Total of 16 Kadeshim. That's why we add the Kaddish after Tehillim and we add the Kaddish after Mishnayos. In total, if a person is davening for the Amud, he totals a total of 16. One of the main avodas on the day of the Yartzeit is learning Torah. Sometimes we forget about that one. We emphasize mainly davening for the Amud, saying the Kaddish, and we're good to go. The main avodah of the day of the Yartzeit is learning Torah. The Rebbe emphasizes that the hiskashrus to the tzaddik in the day of his Yartzeit is through learning his Torah. That's how it's done. So through learning Torah, that is the most important focus a person has to place on. It's customary to learn Mishnayos, to learn the Mishnayos according to the letters. So for today we would learn Yosef Yitzchak, one parak of Mishnah per letter. So, Yud, Vav, Samach, Fei, and then again, Yitzchak, you can repeat the same chapter of the Yud again, but we reread it for each of the letters of the names.
Do you dedicate what you're studying towards that person?
It's automatically dedicated when you're learning it with that, without abbreviation. And of course, not to forget tzedakah. Giving tzedakah is another main tikkun on the day of the Yartzeit. And as the Rebbe directed us on the Yartzeit of the Rebbe Rayatz today, is that before Shachris and before Mincha, we should give a donation to the meisters, to the institutions that carry the flag of the Rebbe Rayatz and of the Rebbe.
How long do you say Kaddish for?
On the day of the Yartzeit?
No, if you say it every day for a year, right?
In the year of Avelos, a child says it for 11 months. But on the Yartzeit, Ashkenazim say it only on the day of the Yartzeit, while Sfardim say from the Shabbos beforehand. They get like a weekend, a Yartzeit weekend. They say, so if the Yartzeit's on Thursday, they'll say from Shabbos until Thursday, they'll say Kaddish. Okay, L'chaim, L'bracha, we've concluded the Yartzeit aspect. Now we can get to the Hilula aspect.
Megan, who's good at that? Let's go to the room with Megan and make it something.
Megan Bainani. niggun of the basic Gimel Thomas.
We don't have the amplified, so we're not sort of like shut out. Good, I could bring it, but I really had to.
The niggun is basic Gimel Thomas. Remember how to say? Okay, we'll begin. L'chaim, l'chaim, l'bracha. The two ways that the Rebbe discussed of being connecting with the tzaddik on the day of his Yartzeit, the first is by learning his Torah, and the second is through singing a niggun of his. So this niggun of Niggun Habeni that we just sung, it was not composed by the Rebbe Rayatz per se, but it was considered his niggun that he adopted. It was his niggun to Chive L'Yosef. It was most beloved to him. And as Chassidus main pnimius, Chassidus demands that a person be internal, which means that when we sing a niggun by Chassidus Farbrengen, that means that the person is intending and he's thinking about the idea of iskashrus, the idea that's affected through the niggun. It's not just a break from the speaker, or the speaker gets a break, but it's one of the main focuses of Chassidus Farbrengen is the nigunim experience. So as we mentioned before, this day has a bit of a contradiction in its essence, that we on the one hand are commemorating a Yartzeit, and on the other hand we are commemorating the day of the Rebbe's start of his leadership. So we know a year later, after Yud Shvat, on Yud Aleph Shvat, when Matzah Yud Shvat was the first official, what you can call, acceptance Farbrengen of the Rebbe, Yud Aleph Shvat, and Tafshin Yud Aleph. And so, as Chassidim, we commemorate this day as the day where the relationship between ourselves and our Rebbe began, which is kind of the opposite of the idea of the Yartzeit. So in general, how should a chassid view the Yartzeit of other tzaddikim, or the Yartzeit of even a previous Rebbe? The idea of iskashrus to a tzaddik, which is one of the main tenets, as we know, of Chassidism, of the Baal Shem Tov, it was very much attacked by the opposition groups in the Baal Shem Tov's time and onwards, possibly till today. What's the necessity of it? Why does a person need to be mekusher with a tzaddik? Why can't a tzaddik just be a manhig, a leader who directs you of how to study Torah, what you should be doing with your life in Avodas Hashem, what you should be working on? But don't get all emotional or this kashrus connection. What's that got to do with it? View it as a Rav or a Rosh Yeshiva. What is the uniqueness of a Rebbe, or a kashrus to a Rebbe, versus the relation of Talmud and a Rosh Yeshiva, or a Balabas and the Rav of his town? They are all in charge of giving direction, spiritual direction, to their constituents. So what's unique about the relation of the Chassid and the Rebbe that so much rose the opposition of the Minhagim, who didn't approve of this type of relationship? So first off, one of the most unique aspects that we find in the idea of iskashrus is the emotional bond. The emotional bond of what we can call the love of a chassid to his Rebbe is something that really the Baal Shem Tov innovated. But in truth, in the Jewish sources we find that this already existed as part of the mitzvah, of one of the mitzvahs in the Torah called the Sid Bakdai. We have a command in the Torah to attach to Hashem. That's one of the 613 commands. How do we attach to Hashem? The Gemara, when it asks this question, the Gemara doesn't say, open up a book of Chumash and start reading. Open up a Gemara and start learning. Pick up a Pirat Tefillin and wear it. It doesn't say. Which we should think it should have answered. What does the Gemara say? You want to fulfill this mitzvah attaching to Hashem, you got to attach to Talmidei Chachamim. Attach yourself to Talmidei Chachamim. And even within that, what does it say? It doesn't say, how do you attach it to Talmidei Chacham? Go to their shiur. You listen to their shiur and you listen to whatever they tell you. No. It says, show them a lot of love. Do business with them. Give them your son in marriage. Marry off your son to the daughter of a Talmid Chacham. It's a very strange Gemara. If you want to attach to God, this is what you got to do. Marry off your son to the daughter of a Talmid Chacham or enter a business deal with them. Have a seudah with them, have a meal with them. That's how you attach to Hashem.
They represent Hashem. Tzaddikim represent Hashem.
And don't the Torah and mitzvahs also?
Of course.
So why is that lacking?
The tzaddik guides you your performance in learning the Torah.
You can't make a business deal with the Torah, but you can shake hands with the tzaddik or your...
Why is shaking your hand with your Rebbe so important to the point that that's the mitzvah of the Sid Bakboy, to attach to God? So the Alter Rebbe really in chapter 2 answers this question. The Alter Rebbe already in the very beginning of Tanya lays down the premises of the Chabad style understanding of Iskashrus, of what the Chabad form of Iskashrus is, of connection is, attaching to a Rebbe. You see, the Alter Rebbe, as we know, was in the opposition not just from the Misnagdim, but also from amongst the Chassidim themselves. They called the Alter Rebbe the Litvak, not just because he came from Litva, but they viewed him to have a very different approach in the philosophies of the Baal Shem Tov. And one of those aspects of differences was regarding his kashrus. What is the connection of a chassid to his Rebbe, to a tzaddik? The Chassidim understood a doctrine that the idea of a person's Rebbe or a person's tzaddik is basically he is the pilot of the airplane. So if you're on his airplane, you're going where he's going. Doesn't matter what you think or what you do, you're flying with him. If he's going in the right direction, you're going also. You're a bad chassid, you're a good chassid. All that is the difference of whether you're getting Pepsi or you're getting plain water as being served to you on the airplane. But you're still in the airplane. You're still part of this Rebbe. You're still part of his group, and you belong to him. Tzaddik ben Manasseh Yechaya. Tzaddik ben Manasseh Yechaya, that the tzaddik gives life to his followers. And they took that to the point where the main avodas, the main demands of divine service is really upon the tzaddik and the Rebbe, and not so much upon his followers, upon the Chassid. The Alter Rebbe took a much deeper and different philosophical approach to this. And it's written in Perek Beis in Tanya, if you read between the lines. The Alter Rebbe in Tanya there explains in chapter 2 that every single Jew has a godly soul, a nefesh elikis. But amongst the level of souls, there are various different degradations. You have souls that are very low, you have souls that are very high. Now, when Ikvasid the Mashiach in the generation before Mashiach's coming, the souls are some of the lowest of the low. They're bechinas akvayim, they're from the level of the heel, which means just like the heel is the last to feel anything. What's the best part to put in hot water to check if it's hot? The tip of your heel, right? That's the best part. You have callus over there, you have some nice thickness. It's the least endangered. But it also is the least nervous. It contains the least amount of nerves. It's the least sensitive. So the souls of Ikvus and Mashiach are souls that have some emotional problems. When I say emotional problems, I don't mean it in the psychological or therapeutic sense. I mean it from the sense of Avodas Hashem. That our emotions in service of God, our love, our fear is very difficult to bring out, to explore, to reveal. And that's where connection to the tzaddik comes in. Says the Alter Rebbe, that Hashem set up a system that even the low-level souls who have this insensitivity have the ability to connect with the original level of Chochmah Vatzilus through the tzaddik, as the tzaddik contains Chochmah Vatzilus inside of him. In other words, when a person learns Torah, when a person does mitzvahs, Of course he's drawing down godliness and connecting to God. But that connection is not the type of connection that we are looking for, which attaches his soul, which is a distant part of God, to the essence of God as it was originally found. That is only accomplished, that connection of a Jew's godly soul to its root and source in Chachma Vatzilus, through the Tzaddik, through the Rebbe. And this the Alter Rebbe writes in his conclusion of chapter 2 in Tanya, that's why we have a mitzvah of to attach the Talmidei Chachamim to the Tzaddikim. And even those who don't do it and rebel against them, they're still connected to the Tzaddikim whether they like it or not. Because their souls cannot receive the connection to the essence of Hashem or to the level of Chachma Vatzilus, the original level of godliness, if it doesn't go through the Tzaddik. So the Tzaddik is there to connect our souls to his soul, which is the level of Chachma Vatzilus, a very high level of divinity, and that enhances our soul to be able to do our work. However, as the Alter Rebbe explains, this sounds like so far we're going in the same perspective as the other Hasidic groups. We connect to the tzaddik, you got on his airplane, he's the pilot, he drives you, you're good to go. Connect your soul to Chachma Vatzilus, you're on the plane. But no, the Alter Rebbe explains throughout the whole Tanya how you have to use this connection to then cultivate it within yourself. So it's basically you get on a plane and then you're told you're going to have to parachute off and you're on your own. It's very interesting when you think about it from a perspective of socialism versus capitalism. The perspective where you say that the tzaddik takes you everywhere and you're pretty much off the hook as long as you're connected is more like a socialism approach where I'm alive, I'm breathing, I deserve. I'm connected to the tzaddik, I'm good enough. I don't have to really pitch in much more. I'm not demanded to work, to serve, to progress. The capitalist approach is that if you don't provide a service in society, you're not going to survive. You have to do something, you have to participate, you have to place due effort in order for you to make money. No one is going to give you anything for free, right? Chabad Hasidic approach is similar to the capitalism approach, where a person has to do his own avodah. A person can't think, well, because I'm a chassid, because I'm connected, therefore I'm good to go already and already on the plane. No, he's being given koiches, special powers and energies to accomplish his mission, but he has to accomplish his mission, and if he doesn't, there's no excuses. No one's going to come help him. No one's going to come save him. He's on his own. The mashal the Rebbe once gave in a Farbrengen in the very early years of this, it's a famous mashal story, that the difference between a Polish chassid versus a Chabad chassid going to his Rebbe for Tishrei. The Polish chassid comes into his Rebbe, and he, comes in for Tishrei, as they all do, by Chassidim, and he has an audience with him, Yechidus, a private audience with the Rebbe, and he discusses different things about his life, his business, his work, maybe some things in Avodas Hashem. Bottom line is, he finishes his Tishrei experience, he's very excited, very happy, he comes back home, and he got Shirayim, he got the love from the Rebbe, and he's very excited, he's very happy. The Chabad Chassid comes, he's very scared to enter into Yechidus. He, of course, came to Lubavitch with a whole list of things to ask for from the Rebbe. His wife told him, we need this, we need to marry off this child, this kid has an issue, we need to bring more parnasa, and the whole list from the wife. And he would come with his whole list, he would travel just for the list to the Rebbe, and by the time he entered into Yechidus with the Rebbe, he knows what I'm going to mention, Gashmias, I'm going to start discussing physical matters. He was so scared and petrified, they didn't open up his mouth, they got to say anything. And in the end, he just discussed his low spiritual state and asking the Rebbe for spiritual direction. And he comes back from Tishrei heartbroken in terms of spiritually, of thinking of his low state. And so while the chassid, the Polish chassid, he has good gashmis and he has good ruchnis, because he asks his Rebbe for the bracha, his Rebbe's a tzaddik, he gives him. And he's carrying his Rebbe's avodah. While the Chabad chassid, he unfortunately forgets to ask for his physical brachas, so he doesn't get them. And as well, he's in a low spiritual state because he knows where he's holding in Avodas Hashem. And he said, the Rebbe then said, and then it comes after 120. The Polish Chassid goes up to Shemayim, and they say, who is your Rebbe? And he says, this Rebbe, or this Rebbe. And he say, oh, Ahelik a Tzaddik, straight to Gan Eden, you're joining his Tish. And comes the Chabad Chassid, and they ask him, what's going to be? They look at his rap sheet, this, and this, and this, and this. And they send him, to the other place. That's what the Rebbe said. They send him to the other place. And then the Rebbe concluded that the Chiddush of the Alter Rebbe is that it's better to go to the other place but demand your own Avodah than to go to Gan Eden on the back of someone else's Avodah. This was the Chiddush that the Alter Rebbe emphasized. Not Chas v'Shalom to belittle or put down the other forms of service, but to emphasize the uniqueness of Chabad Chassidic philosophy is that every Jew is believed in that he can make change. It's again, we use the mashal of capitalism. It's really amazing how it fits in. You have the ability to start a business. No one's stopping you. You have to work hard. You have the ability to make change. You can open up a new startup, and you can change the world. Every chassid, every Jew is believed in and has the power to become a Talmid Chacham, to learn Torah, to be able to do new things in Yiddishkeit. In fact, something very interesting that maybe we don't document or pay attention to enough. Most of the takanas that we as Lubavitchers follow today were not started by the Rabbi. The Rebbeim received advice or received hatzais, they received recommendations from different people, and they adapted it. I'll give an example. We all say Tehillim Shabbos Mevarchim, the whole book of Tehillim. That takana, of course, is known as the takana of the Rebbe Rayatz, and we're not changing it from being a takana of the Rebbe Rayatz. But as the Rebbe Rayatz writes in his letters, it was initiated by a chassid living in the town of, in Russia, the Lubavitch town of Nevel. He was a shuv, a shoichet ubaidik in Nevel. And he wrote to the Rebbe Rayatz in Eitz, I think it's a good idea if the Rebbe Rayatz would come up with a takana of saying Tehillim, the entire Tehillim, every Shabbos. Every Shabbos. The Rebbe Rayatz wrote back to him, we have the letters, he wrote back, I don't think every Shabbos it should be done, it would be kind of hard. Every Shabbos should be done, but at least Shabbos Mevarchim. And that's the takana came out. And the Rebbe in another letter thanks this chassid. He tells the chassidim, and I'm thanking this chassid for advising me, for giving me this idea. And a lot of the other takanas that we keep today are very similar to that. So people get a wrong impression as if that I'm just a little chassid, I really can't do anything, I'm just a little Jew, I'm just, I can only take what they're giving me. I really can't give anything back. And the answer is not true. Chabad Chassidism demands that you come up with your own ways of giving to the Jewish society. And that's what the entire idea of shlichus is that the Rebbe told people that I am not the only one in charge of making the whole world become knowledgeable of Judaism. It's every Jew's responsibility. And therefore, every Jew would have the obligation or the ability to go out and help another Yid and bring the light to another Yid. L'chaim, l'chaim. This is making you guys new Thomas. Ah, yeah, 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 yeah. Ah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Chapter 224. Put a rock on the grave. Represents that you were there, making a sign that you were there. It's legit, yeah. It's a legit custom.
It's like it's not like graffiti. It's
absolutely not graffiti. No. As we mentioned before, the special, unique quality that Chassidus introduced to the relationship between the Rosh Yeshiva, the rabbi of the town, versus the chassid and rebbe is the love, the emotion. How many people love the rabbi of their town? How many people love the Rosh Yeshiva? Well, sure, a lot of people do. But the deep connection that Chassidus introduced is unique to Chassidism. And we find that there's there's an overindulgence of religious service surrounding the Rebbe, surrounding the tzaddik, which of course the Minhagim had problems with. But this idea that we mentioned before is rooted in that Gemara, which says that attached to a Talmid Chacham, the mitzvah is to show him love. That's what the Chinuch writes. When the Chinuch writes down this mitzvah of a boy Sidbukum, to attach to Talmid Chachamim, says we have a mitzvah d'oraisa to love the Talmid Chacham. And the Rebbe Rayatz writes in a letter, there was an individual who wrote to the Rebbe Rayatz, part of this letter has been printed in Ayem Yom. How am I connected to you, the Rebbe? And the Rebbe Rayatz replied, through listening to my directives, following what I tell you, through learning my Torahs, and then he writes, and throughout the generations of Chassidim. Chassidim were accustomed to set aside a set time every single day, an hour a day, or if they couldn't do that much, they would set aside an hour a week, or however much time they were able to give, that's the wording of the letter, to contemplate matters to arouse a feeling of love for their Rebbe. And then he describes, what kind of love am I referring to, the Rebbe describes? A physical love like the love of a child to a father, like the love of a husband to a wife, like a spousal love. A real felt emotion. And that Chassidim would spend time to work and develop this emotion, this love. And the reason is because Hashem created the universe in a way, and created the Jewish religion in a way, that all the different communications that we have, whether it be with God or whether it be with people, love, the emotion called love, is the oil that makes it transpire, that makes it happen. If a person does a mitzvah without love of Hashem, the Zohar states, it stays tachas Hashem. If a person learns Torah without Abbas Hashem, it stays under the sun. It doesn't get elevated above. It lacks the ability to make the connection. And the same thing applies in the relationship to a Rebbe. The same thing applies in the emphasis that Rebbe writes in Tanya, that we connect our neshama, our low neshama, to the chachma of Atzilus, to the high level and initial, essential level found in the tzaddik. Love is the oil that helps make that connection come through. Without love, it's static. It's a static connection. It's a difficult connection. The connection may not go. And therefore, one of the fundaments of the relation between a chassid and a rebbe is that a chassid would arouse love, like a physical love for his rebbe. And it went the other way around, that the rebbe aroused physical love for his chassidim. And it says, we have a tradition from the Baal Shem Tov, that the Rebbeim think about those who are makusher to them, those who are connected to them every single day, 3 times a day, thrice a day. Shachris, Mincha, and Ma'ariv. And they daven for them and they think about them. The relationship is a very two-way street. And the Rebbe discussed this in the Ma'amar of Basi Lagani when he described the Avos Yisrael of the Mitzvah Rebbe, Admar and Tzai, that he received a physical ailment due to the sins of one of his chassidim. He said, look at what your sin has caused to my flesh. And it's not to say, look how terrible you are. That wasn't the message. The message was, look how much we're connected. Understand the repercussions of your actions. Don't think my little something is not going to do anything, has no effect. At the same time that we said, you have to parachute off that plane, you don't just rely on the pilot, you got to go on your own and do this, you're still connected to the tzaddik. So a pagam, a blemish in the chassid is a blemish chas v'shalom in the tzaddik. It can cause a repercussion of blemish in the tzaddik. And we find throughout history, we'll mention a few stories to emphasize this point, of the great emotional connection between chassidim and the rebbes to chassidim, and how because it's already a very emotional connection, just like there's a concept called a tzara in Judaism, which is, right, a sister wife, a co-wife. If a man marries 2 wives, the second wife, or the 2 wives are called co-wives, and they're called in Hebrew tzaros, because they cause tzaros to each other. The wife doesn't want another wife involved in the picture. So too, the relation of chassid and rebbe is very unique and individualized. And chassidim were very particular not to go to other rebbes and not to do iskashros to other rebbes if they already have a rebbe. Not chas v'shalom to diminish in the tzidkus, in the righteousness or the holiness of another rebbe, but just that this is not my rebbe, this is not my avenue, this is not my chachma v'tzilus. I have to connect through my avenue. I have one father and one mother. That doesn't mean other fathers and other mothers are not fathers and mothers. That just means they're not my father and mother. We had one Maisa with in the times of the Alter Rebbe, Mittler Rebbe, with the famed chassid of Hillel Paratcher. Rabbi Hillel Paratcher was an Eli Gadol, who was a great genius from his original city. He wasn't originally from Paritch, and his father was a chassid of one of the great students of the Maggid, the Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl. When Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl passed away, his son, Reb Mordechai Chernobyl, took over. And the son of Reb Hillel Paritch, he became a chassid of the son of Reb Chernobyl. And he was connected to him until his late teens. He one time became acquainted with the Sefer Atanya of the Alter Rebbe, and he fell in love. It was love at first sight. It was amazing. He was already a Baki Gomer in Shas and in Kabbalah, and he thought of himself as a great tzaddik. You can't get better than this. He opens up the first chapter in Tanya and he sees, wow, halavai beinani, if only I can be a beinani, meaning I'm a Russian. And he was very turned on by these doctrines of the Alter Rebbe, and he decided he wanted to become a chassid of the Alter Rebbe. And there's different stories. He tried to meet the Alter Rebbe. In any event, he became a Chabad chassid. When his Rebbe, Matlut Chernobyl, found out about this, he was very upset. He called him for an interview. And he told him, I want you to know the following. Do whatever you want. I want you to know the following. Your father's neshama was connected to my father's neshama. Your neshama is connected to my neshama. If you go somewhere else, I can take no responsibility for what will happen to you. And it's possible that if you travel to another Rebbe, that an accident may happen with your carriage, with your wagon, and it may not be very good. That's what Matlut Chernobyl told the whole parish. Matlut Chernobyl was no game. He was a big tzaddik in his own right. So Reb Hillel was naturally very frightened. Very frightened. He didn't know what to do. But his burning desire to become a chassid, a Chabad chassid, was so strong that he said, be it what it will, I will travel, this already the Alter Rebbe passed away, I will travel to the next Rebbe, the Mittler Rebbe. And on his journey traveling to the Mittler Rebbe, indeed, his wagon, his caravan got into an accident. It flipped over. And they ended up falling onto the dirty mud of the Russian roads. And Baruch Hashem, though, he was pretty much saved without a scratch. He got up, cleaned himself up, and continued his journey, and entered the Mittler Rebbe in Yechidus. He came to Lubavitch, and he had a Yechidus, an audience with the Mittler Rebbe. Before he was able to say anything, the Mittler Rebbe told him, the Mittler Rebbe opened the audience by saying that sometimes when a tzaddik says that a person will get into an accident, it can be fulfilled by falling into the mud. So he told him to So this was one story where we see there was a soul connection between one Rebbe and another chassid, and it was hard to let go. But for whatever reason, the Hillel made the change, made the switch. The story with the Rebbe Rayatz. He was a chassid. He passed away in Tovshin Nun. His name was Rabbi Belazinski. He was the mashpia of the Chabad Shul in Ramat Gan. He was originally from the town of Atvoksk in Poland. And he was born into a Hasidic family, a Polish Hasidic family. Unfortunately, it became extinct after the Holocaust, the dynasty that he belonged to. But his story, as many Polish Hasidic groups became, unfortunately, but he had a very interesting story. He was learning in the yeshiva that was affiliated with his Hasidic group in Warsaw. Poland was the center of Jewry at that time. There were over 3 million Jews living in Poland in the 1930s. And it had also the most amount of Hasidic groups, of Hasidic followings. So he belonged to a minor Hasidic following in Warsaw, and he was in the yeshiva, The Rebbe Rayatz had sent Hasidim, specifically a few Hasidim, to different areas of Europe, especially Poland, to spread Hasidus. Sometimes they would spread not Chabad Hasidus, like when they came to the Ger Shuls, they would tell the Ger Hasidim to learn Sfas Emes. But also he sent to Warsaw a certain Chassid, one of the Guraris, to teach Tanya to students, including students in this yeshiva. So he would come once a week and he gave a Shiur Tanya in this Hasidic yeshiva, and they had no problem. Everything went fine. Everything went fine until the Rebbe began realizing that these students are not just learning the philosophical aspects of Tanya, they're starting to become a shtickle Chabadskers. Now, if you have a small group as it is of followers, to make it even smaller makes it be close to extinction. So he was very unhappy at this, so to say, power grab that this chassid was doing, taking his followers from his own yeshiva. So he gave the direction to ban the Tanya Shiur in the yeshiva Warsaw. They didn't know what to do. The students very much wanted to continue to come, but they were threatened of being thrown out of the yeshiva if anybody comes to the Tanya Shiur. In any event, they started an underground Tanya Shiur in a different area of Warsaw. Warsaw was a large city. And the students of the yeshiva, a few of the students, not all, but a few of the students of the yeshiva who were really very strongly into it, would come and show up to the shiur that was held in the house of this Gurari, who was a messenger of the Rebbe Rayatz. And this chassid, the Meir Blazinski, was one of them. He was one of these students. The other students, they remained chassidim of their chassidic group, and but they learned Tanya, so nothing happened to them that would take them away from the chassidic group. But Meir Blazinski, he became very, very much into it, and his Rebbe didn't want it. So he had an audience with him, and he told him, I hear that you're still going to this class. I'm giving you an ultimatum. Either you stop, or I'm telling you right now, he basically threatened him, Yashlim Shnasa. You won't make the year. You won't survive the year. his desire of learning Chassidus, of learning Tanya, was so strong that he disregarded what his Rebbe said. His Rebbe was a tzaddik, was a holy Jew, and his words came true. And we shouldn't think of this from the eyes of very coarse eyes of, look at this, jealousy, politics. It's not. It is, but it's not, because the Rebbe understands that this chassid, this individual, has a neshama that's connected to him, and he belongs to his way of Avodas Hashem, and he's doing everything in his power to protect them. Bottom line, this chassid fell deeply ill, very, very ill, that year, to the point that he was on his deathbed. The doctors gave up hope, and his mother went into the Rebbe and begged the Rebbe, please take off your curse. Please rescind, retract what you said. So he said, I can't unless he gives his word that he's not going to go back to be involved in that class, in that shiur. But even in his wailing breaths, he refused. He said he would rather die a chassid of the Alter Rebbe, chassid of Chassidus. Two of his friends decided to travel to the Rebbe Rayatz to ask the Rebbe Rayatz for a bracha. He was deathly ill. They traveled to the Rebbe Rayatz, and they entered into Yechidus, and they were crying, and they were explaining the whole situation, the whole story. And the Rebbe Rayatz basically smiled at them. He didn't say a word. This was when the Rebbe Rayatz was in Atvot. He smiled at them, and he motioned that the Yechidus is over. So they obviously thought it was very strange. He doesn't respond, no response, just laughs. Bottom line is, by the time they came back to Warsaw, this student was already healthy and back on his feet. And he eventually, based on the directive of the Rebbe Rayatz, moved to Eretz Yisrael before Nazi Germany took over Poland. Or it was really, they already took over, but it wasn't, it was before the ghettos, and he was able to immigrate to Eretz Yisrael, and he, Baruch Hashem, started the whole...
What's his name?
Meir Belazhinsky. Mascot. Yeah. So what we're getting to now is the following. So we understand that every chassid is mekushah to his Rebbe, and he shouldn't try to go looking elsewhere. These stories that we mentioned were all about chassidim looking elsewhere. They're exceptional stories. But in general, every chassid is connected with his Rebbe, and it's a very special relationship. So now a question comes back to what we started with. What is the relationship of a chassid to the Rebbes of the Rebbes, meaning the previous Rebbes? What is our relationship with the Rebbe Rayatz? How are we supposed to view it? So you have some chassidim who actually feel that you shouldn't visit the kvarim of the previous Rebbes, because that's like an affrontation to the connection of you to your direct Rebbe. This is your Rebbe. So there's a talk. There's a talk of the Rebbe in 5711, Tavshin Yud Aleph, in the month of Kislev, Yud Kislev, before he accepted the Messias, where he really discusses and elaborates and clarifies this point. And he says the following. He's discussing there that today is the Yartzeit of the Mittler Rebbe, Tes Kislev, the birthday and the Yartzeit. And Chassidim are connected with the Mittler Rebbe, and we give a pidyon nefesh to the Mittler Rebbe. Pan. Now, as we all know in Chassidic lingo, a pan represents the ultimate connection of where you're basically handing yourself over to the Rebbe. It's called a pidyon nefesh, redeeming of the soul. It's a very deep emotional, spiritual connection that you are being put into when you give a pidyon nefesh. So what does it mean that the Chassidim would give, he says, if the Mittler Rebbe were alive today, which Chassid would not go in to give a pidyon nefesh, a pan to the Mittler Rebbe? And then he explained. Now, even though we have our Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, who we're connected to, and we don't connect to anyone else in that type of relationship, nonetheless, all the Chabad Rebbeim are what's called Memali Makims. In other Chassidic groups, the order is that every Rebbe is his own administration. We all respect, in America, all the presidents, right, maybe, but every president runs his own administration, and they can do things differently. In fact, one administration can completely negate and undo everything that was done in the previous administration. And we find this as well amongst Hasidic Rebbes. There were Rebbes in Polish Chassidus that they undid or they changed or they redid different takanas of their previous rabbis. It wasn't necessarily a continuation. It's a new administration, a new boss is in town, a new sheriff's in town, as they say. But this was not the case in Chabad Chassidus. In Chabad Chassidus, every rebbe is viewed as the Mimali Makim, as taking over the steps of all the previous rebbeim and taking it now a step further in his own specific channel of Avodah. And the Rebbe explained it like this. Inside the neshama of each Rebbe is included the neshamas of the previous Rebbe. So when we discuss the skashrus to the tzaddik, in this case the Yartzeit of the Rebbe Rayatz, it's to connect to the soul of the Rebbe Rayatz as he's found through the soul of our Rebbe. And so too with all the Rebbe. And therefore the Rebbe said that on the day of a Yartzeit, a person should learn the Torah of the Rebbe, and a person should sing the Gunim of the Rebbe, and that is considered like a pan, a pidyon nefesh that you're giving to the Rebbe, where the Rebbe helps you out in return. What do I mean by helping you out? With his soul prays for you. It's referring to spiritual matters. As we mentioned earlier, we emphasized earlier that by Chabad Chassidus, the main thing wasn't that you can get a Gashmius bracha from your Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe complained about that a lot. The Chassidim would ask him for blessings of physical matters. But rather, the main purpose of the Rebbeim is to give you spiritual guidance, or to give you spiritual sustenance, to feed one's soul with extra energy in service of God. And that's something that is achieved on the day of the Yartzeit, and the Chassid does his Avodah.
What about our Rebbe? He was saying, Gashmius, the Ruchnis. Gashmius always first.
Right. Well, we know today that it's hard to work the Ruchnis without the Gashmius, and we're close to the Mashiach, so in the Gashmius you have the Ruchnis. But at the end of the day, we still have to know that the main avodah is not eating the burger, the steaks, but it's the doing of the mitzvahs.
Still.
Sing a nigun of our Rebbe. All right, we spoke about nigunim. Sing Tzamol Chanafshi is a nigun of the Rebbe that he taught as a nigun of the Alter Rebbe. Tzamol Chanafshi, the Rebbe taught us, was a nigun of the Alter Rebbe that became lost. And Chassidim say either the Alter Rebbe taught him this nigun personally, or it was really known to Chassidim and just wasn't sung very much, and then it became reintroduced. like David HaMelech is saying, I thirst for God. Tzama lecha nafshi. My soul thirsts for Hashem. Kama lecha b'sari. My flesh thirsts for Him. To the point that I'm able to reach expiry with the soul. Be'eretz yafad mimayim, like a soul who is found in a place empty, a desert empty of water, just like, as we all know, when you've been running for a half hour, how you drink that Gatorade down with such passion and thirst to quench, right? The thirst. So too, a Jew's thirst for God should be similar to that, as if he's been in a desert. As a person who lives in the Beis HaMedrash, sometimes it's hard for him to arouse a thirsting love for God, because he's surrounded by Kedusha. As the saying goes, a constant pleasure is no longer a pleasure. In another place in Chassidus it says, a constant pleasure becomes a pain. You think about it, it's very deep. I don't want to elaborate right now on that, but think about that. There's a lot of muscles, good muscles on that statement. A constant pleasure becomes a pain. So the Baal Shem Tov said, touched on that pasuk of Tehillim, that a person, that's one of the Avedas, by the way, Kriyas Shmalamita. The reason why in Chassidus Chabad, even till today, unlike what some people think, we emphasize the necessity and Aveda of Nerirus, of a Jew having bitterness as at his bad ways, of having bitterness at being distanced from Hashem, is for the sake of Be'eretz Sia V'ayif Limayim, so we can feel the lack of alikus, the lack of spirituality, so we can then want it and desire it. As if you don't care about what you're missing, you're not going to care about what you have. If it doesn't bother you that you're missing something, you're not going to celebrate having it. In order to be able to celebrate God, it needs to bother you that you're distanced. And that's why the Aveda of Merirus is one of the fundamental ingredients necessary for Avedas Hashem to be able to arouse the love of Hashem. As it's Ratzei V'shuv, you need to have a off in order to get it on. I'll say a story.
In the second was King of Kaddish,
That even in the Beis HaMedrash, I should be able to thirst for you like I do in the desert.
But the idea is to see,
Yeah.
to see what
Uzuchoch V'dech, to see your splendor, your honor.
might is always might.
Yeah.
So what are we asking? Are we asking for something?
Very in simplicity, we're asking to be able to have a thirst and love for God. Very simple terms. Let's work on those three words, and we can work on the deeper meanings of the pasuk. That's already a lifetime of people right there. It's interesting that by Chabad Chassidim, as opposed to other Chassidic groups, since the emphasis was more on that the Chassid is given the reins to lead by his Rebbe, he's on his own type of thing, so to say. So today we view this a little differently, but back then, Chassidim weren't as much as bottled to the Rebbe's directives as they were by other Chassidic groups. Of course, one of the epitomes of the relationship is that when a Rebbe says something, you listen to him. But by other Chassidic groups, this was more emphasized. There's a sikh of the Rebbe Rashab where he actually says this, that Chabad Chassidim should have this aspect as well, as do the other Chassidim. Anyways, I'll share with you a story of this kashrus, an interesting story. I shared it by one of the women Farbrengens a few months ago. In Russia, in the 1930s, Stalin time, the epitome of oppression of Judaism. So there were elections that were being held in Moscow for the chief rabbi. And as all elections, you have a number of candidates and you have a lot of politics. What's around today never changed from back then. Same dirty politics then, same dirty politics today. The people change, but the dirty politics is still around. And as you can imagine, in a city like Moscow, the center of Russia, the chief rabbi, the position of chief rabbi, would have an influence not only on Moscow Jewry, but on the entire Russian Federation. And under Stalin era, you can understand the absolute necessity for there to be a Rav who has a spine to stand his ground and direct his followers, directed to say and do. So naturally, the Chassidim picked a Chassidish Rav, a student of the Rebbe Rayatz, previously of the Rebbe Rashab, to run for the office of chief rabbi of Moscow. The Minhagim in the city chose another individual who was an alumni of the Slobodka Yeshiva. So there was, like all the natural Litvish Chassidic politics of elections, that occurred here as well. There were flyers everywhere, they had campaigns, and they were working very hard so the election would go in favor of the Chassidic candidate. The commissioner of the election, of the campaigning for the Chassidim, this particular Chassid, he traveled to the Rebbe Rayatz in Poland. Maybe it was Riga at that time, I believe. Rebbe Rayatz was living in Riga then, which is Latvia. And he wanted to discuss with him different strategies of how to be successful in the campaign. He sat with the Rebbe Rayatz and he told him all the information. And the Rebbe Rayatz then told him, I don't think it's in the best interest of Russian Jewry for us to vote for our candidate. I think we should vote for the other candidate. The candidate of the Minhagim. And you know, if such a thing happened today, it wouldn't happen today because, for a number of reasons. But if such a thing happened today, either the Rebbe would lose his followers, or the followers would lose their Rebbe, or the politics would be from here till tomorrow. This chassid was shocked. They put a lot of money, effort, and energy and belief of the necessity of having the Chassidic Rav. But he was a chassid. He came back to Moscow and he delivered the message to the Ziknei Chassidim and the commission. And there were a number of different responses. Like the 4 groups by Kriyas Yamsuf. One group said, if the Rebbe says so, we got to follow it. That's it. We're going to vote for the other candidate. Campaign's off. Another group said, what are you talking about? There's no way on earth the Rebbe would say such a thing. This chassid must have misunderstood. There must be some misunderstanding here, broken telephone. Maybe he said chassid, he understood Minhagim, maybe he had too many l'chaims that day. There must be some miscommunication in the chassid. Another group said, listen, not everything the Rebbe says we can understand, but we're here in Moscow, we know the situation. So there were many different attitudes. And they called a meeting amongst all the Chassidim, and they called a meeting amongst all the Chassidim to decide what to do with this new information. And the debates were going back and forth. Do we say, the 4th group was, let's send a delegation to the Rebbe Rayatz and verify this, and find this out and verify this. Until one of the Alter Chassidim got up, and he lifted up the chair, like this, and he said, have you guys lost your minds? The Rebbe just told us to vote for the other guy. Campaign is off. Any other word from anyone else, I'm going to throw this chair at him. The idea was to break a little bit the Eitzahara, the Nefesh HaBahamis. And so it was that indeed they agreed to call off the campaign. And who was elected the Rav of Moscow in 1933? A Slobodka alumni who was the candidate of the Minhagim. He was unanimously voted for the position. Candidate of the Minhagim, he was unanimously voted for the position. Now, no one, of course, understood the answer to the big question of why. Why did the Rebbe Rayatz foresee? So, this Rabbi, I believe his last name was Levin, Rabbi Levin. We never received from the Rebbe Rayatz any reason why, but Chassidim do tell over that this Rav was indeed did have a spine and was very, very strong in leading Torah Judaism, and that's why he didn't last very long. He maybe lasted 4 or 5 years until he eventually was sent to Siberia. And we don't know what happened to him. But the Rebbe Rayatz wasn't doing it to save his own chassid, obviously.
No, many Chassidim that he sent it into the fire.
100%. So, well, what is told is that the Chassidim there was a Chassid that was working for this Rav inside the room where he would have audiences with congregants. And he told over something very interesting, which the Chassidim said, the Rebbe Yartzeit must have foreseen this, and that's why he chose him as a candidate. What was it? When one individual came in, back then the law was in Russia, right? We're going back to communism, socialism, right? Where everyone's equal except those that are not. And basically everyone had to work. Everyone was stripped of their jobs, of their businesses. Everything now belongs to the government. And everyone's given a position of where they work in, and you have to work on Saturdays. And if you didn't work on Saturdays, that means you don't work. And if you don't work, that means you don't get food stamps. You don't get food stamps, you don't eat, you starve, and you die. It's that simple. So this was a very, very dangerous situation for Jewry who are Shomer Shabbos, who keep Shabbos. What do? So Rabbanim had to deal with various shilas of giving guidance to Yidden of how they can continue doing their job without desecrating Shabbos per se. Let's say if someone's a guard of a factory. So you can just stand there 24 hours, you're not desecrating Shabbos, but that's a simple answer. There were other jobs that were more complex in what they had to do, so you had to give direction of what's their Rabbanim, what's their Raisa. Wow. So this individual went in, who had a job on Shabbos like everyone else, and he asked the Rav for what he can do. And the Rav sat with him for a whole hour, and they went through the different authorities, poskim, discussions, approaches, decisions. And he basically came up with a very dachak, a very difficult psak to allow it to be done because of the duress of the circumstance. But in truth, it's not glatt kosher, as they say. This was a very, very doichik heter. Fine, the Yid goes out, he was a simple Jew, he's happy, doesn't have to give up his life, doesn't have to starve to death. And he continues on his life. Another time, this individual, this chassid tells over, a Lubavitcher chassid from Moscow came in, who was learned, he was a student of Teinchet Minim, an alumni of some Teinchet Minim. And he was very learned, he came into the Rav, as some learned people do, with the heter already written there. He just needed the Rav to give a stamp of approval. Right? Some people call a Rav because they really want to know. Some people call a Rav as therapy for their conscience. The Rav has two positions. Sometimes he does the second more than he does the first. Right? The question comes after the person did what he did. In any event, so this individual already came with the psak written up, and he went through all the different opinions, and he said, listen, I have a job in this place, and I'm working in this situation, and this is this, it's a situation of duress, and we have these places. So the Rav in this case took his piece of paper, which is full of, his heter, and he said he tore it to shreds, and he said, no way, you're not getting a heter from me. So this chassid was shocked when he saw this, because this was a similar situation to the previous guy. What is the selectia, the discrimination here in the verdicts? This is called unequal sentencing. So the Rav told him the following, that the simple Jew came to me in Nebuch. He's a simple Yid. What am I supposed to do? He's going to starve to death. This Lubavitcher is a chassid of Teinchet Minim, which are on the forefront of Mesiras Nefesh, of carrying the flame, the torch of Judaism in the USSR. If I tell him he can work on Shabbos, everything will be gone.
Wow.
This was an example of some of the greatness of this Rav that came as the Rebbe Yartzeit's choice to choose for the chief rabbi.
We shouldn't go from this.
Do a simcha niggun. Simcha niggun. No, you guys said l'chaim? English or Hebrew? Ten Ivrit or ten Ivrit?
I understand English.
Your friend?
Yes, well, she was.
English or Hebrew?
He understands also English.
You understand English a little bit? As much as the l'chaim that you took?
Yes.
If you take more, you understand more.
You also. He thinks.
In the first Sikha, l'chaim l'ivracha. I'm at my end. I'm not yet 40, so I can't have more than a revius per the Rebbe's Tachana. And if the Rebbe said, Ben Arboim Labina, when you're 40, you have enough understanding not to have more than a revius. Before you're 40, you have to still be told. You're still a little immature.
The Rebbe said if you asked him for a bottle when you were 40.
I heard, I don't know if this is true, this is unverified information, that someone once wrote to the Rebbe that he kept the takana his whole life. He turned 40 years old, he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. He's so happy now that he can finally drink like a real chassid by l'chaim. The Rebbe wrote back to him, Ben Arboim Labina, and the Rebbe underlined Labina. Anyways. Fine. But this is another example. This is an interesting example where we find that there's some people, some chassidim who we call ourselves chassidim, we chas v'shalom would never not call ourselves chassidim, but sometimes we overstep the boundaries of the takanas of the Rabbi. You know, it's forbidden for a chassid, who considers himself a chassid, to drink more than a revius of mashkeh Farbrengen if he's under 40 years old. Now that's one of the only takanas the Rebbe ever made. It's one of the few gzeiros, as you could say, decrees that the Rebbe ever made. And anyway, so this is part of his kashrus, obviously, is not just to talk the talk, but also to walk the walk. To do what he tells you to do. In that first sikha, in that first talk of the Rebbe, he discussed, right, this is the sikha that preceded the Maimon. The sikha that preceded the Maimon on that first night of Yud Shvat, Tavshin Yud Aleph, or Yud Aleph Shvat, it was nighttime. The Rebbe spoke about the three fundamental avodas, services of Avas Hashem, Avas HaTorah, and Avas Yisrael. And all these three are connected with each other. we have to remind ourselves that in this Sikha and in the first Maimer, the mission statement for our generation, the mission statement for our mission, for our purpose down here, was laid out. In the Maimer Basar Lagani, the Rebbe spread out the global goal of bringing down the Shekhinah, of finalizing the original intent of the world's creation, to bring the Shekhinah down the Tachtayna. And the Rebbe wrote how that's done, based on the Maimer of the Rebbe Rayatz, which interestingly is noted that when that Maimer was printed of Yud Shvat, for Shabbos, right, it was printed Friday, the Yud Shvat Maimer of Basi Lagani of the Rebbe Rayatz, the printed Maimer that they were studying that night and that morning, before the Stalkus and after the Stalkus, had a Yud missing from the name Shlita, from the word Shlita by the Rebbe Rayatz. There was a Yud missing, which means Yomim. There was a Yud missing. In any event, so in that Maimer, the Rebbe doesn't just say, guys, go bring the Shekhinah down. There's a handle, you just got to pull it and bring it down as if you're pulling down the shades. He says it's done through Iskafia and Ishapcha. Those two lovely Chabad words, which are so much easier said and what is Iskafia and Ishapcha? Ishapcha is very easy to do. You have a few l'chaims, you roll on the table. Sometimes you roll onto people, you roll onto food, right? You can do a cooler. That was a joke. What is the Avodah of Iskafia and Ishapcha? So in the previous Sikha that preceded the Maimer, the Rebbe already laid out some of the details of this Avodah of Iskafia and Ishapcha. And that is working on Avas Hashem, Avas HaTorah, and Avas Yisrael. And the Rebbe explained how all three are connected. There's no such thing as a Jew who really loves Hashem, but he has a problem loving other Jews. And there's no such thing as a person who really loves other Jews if he has trouble loving Hashem. They are one and the same. Avos Hashem and Avos HaTorah and Avos Yisrael. One of the entire messages and purposes of Sefer HaTanya, in fact, we can say the entire message and purpose of Sefer HaTanya and Toras HaChassidus is for the sake of a person working and developing these emotions of loving God. As well, we find Toras HaChassidus is filled with the development of emotion of loving a fellow Jew. And it's not just because they chose these two different services, but because they're one and the same and connected. The idea of love of Hashem that we are demanded to arouse is not one of selfishness, as love can be very selfish. All the food over here that was eaten on this table were victims of our love. How come they're no longer alive? Because we love them. So love can be something very selfish. We can destroy things that we love for the sake of attaining them. Love can be that I like God because God makes me feel good. So makes me feel good is placing the emphasis on me. I love my country because it gives me great social status. I get great tax returns, tax benefits. So you're loving yourself, and it happens to be the country is an instrument. You're loving yourself, and God is an instrument. Now, this is a high level. Halavai that we should feel real love of God, even of that type. But Chassidus says that real love of God is selfless. And selfless love is that we care of giving the Eibishter Nachasur. We love him because, similar to the love of a parent to a child, or the way a love of a spouse should be to each other, which is not a love which I love my spouse because of all the great things my spouse provides me, and that type of love is a very dangerous love, because if that wording provides me stops being applicable, then often the spouse stops being a spouse. In other words, if Ava Hatluya B'Davar, a love that's dependent on something external, the external matter fails, the love fails, right? That's why we say secular love, or loving before marriage, is very dangerous, because you're entering a relationship based on an emotion that may not be there later on, as opposed to entering a relationship, and due to the relationship you're gaining an emotion. And since you're in the relationship, you will have the emotion. There's nothing that can take that emotion away.
How we can check it?
Uh,
How we can check it if it's a selfish love?
Oh, very good. How do we know? It's a good question. How can we know if our love... So first of all, we have to try to arouse love of Hashem. And how do we arouse love of Hashem? Even the selfish love of Hashem, it's better than nothing, right? Selfish love is better than no love. So we have to follow what the Alter Rebbe writes in his book called Tanya. The book called Tanya is not just a book of intellect. It's nice information. We learn cool psychology. We learn about the souls and the different personalities of the souls and the Marish Chayra and Mar Levana, and we learn all about the Klippas. It's interesting Kabbalah, and it's interesting psychology, and we remain who we are. Chas v'shalom. That's using the precious medicine of Tanya, as the Rebbe Rayat says, Chas v'shalom, to be a masculine chassidus. The whole purpose of chassidus is to be an oived, is to take it and then work on it. Even just a little bit, but it has to be worked on. So a person has to set himself those times, which is meant to be in davening, to contemplate deeply into matters that arouse a real feeling of love for the Eibishter. What are those matters that arouse those feelings? The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya from Perek Mem Beis until Perek Mem Ches. Look it up. There's many different contemplations, but as the Rebbe pointed out, one of the most vivid ones is when if a person ever had something miraculous happen to them, something, a real finger of God in their lives, that should remain with them forever. And that should be something that can, when they contemplate again and live through again, can really bring them into a realization of God's reality and a feeling of love of Hashem. And that's why Hashem does miracles. The whole purpose of why Hashem does miracles to the world in general and to us personally is so we have that little glimmer of light, of Gilui Elikus, to then develop that into a feeling of love and passion. And we have to make use of it.
Who deserves that?
Every Jew. The Rebbe says every Jew deserves it. Every Jew deserves it, and every Jew needs it. But that's what the Rebbe told the Rebbe. This was an area where the Rebbe diverted from the Rebbe Rayatz. The Rebbe Rayatz, was saying that by Chassidim, as it always was by Chabad Chassidim, the miracles were under the table. We don't even pick them up. We don't bother with that narishkeit. We're interested in the deep contemplative aspects of Elikus. What the Rebbe says, for our generation, the low souls of Ikvas the Meshicha, we need these simple medicines, which is revealed Hashgacha Pratis from the Eibishter. And when a Jew gets that, run with it. Don't, we tell it over, we mention it one day, and it's done for the rest of our life. Chas v'shalom, the person has to live with these things. These are his personal experiences for himself. The Eibishter is sending a message to him, and he's able to work on that. When, we mentioned this in the Shiur on Shabbos, our Torah Arshir, that the Rebbe Rayat said that a person with a good imagination can be a real good chassid, a real good oived. As the greater you have of an imagination, the more you can transport yourself to live in what you're thinking about, to begin feeling what you're thinking about. And this is the first avodah that we're commanded in, is Avos Hashem. Avos Hashem, to have a love for Hashem. The love has to be selfless. How do we know if the love is selfless or the love is selfish? So if the love doesn't then translate into a greater sensitivity, a greater love, a greater care to another fellow Jew, so we know that there was a lack of bittul, a selflessness in this love. As the whole idea of the true love of Hashem that we're meant to have is that we are being nullified to God. We're giving ourselves up to God. We are viewing ourselves as nothing. But for a person to say, as the Rebbe once quoted, that he once met a chassid who said, besides for the Eibishter, the Rebbe, and me, nothing else exists. The Rebbe said, on the one hand, that's great bittul, and that's great yeshus. What about all the other 7 billion people on earth? Just you! So it sounds like bittul, he's just God, just the Rebbe, but no, bittul is all the way. Selflessness has to be all the way. And in fact, the idea of a skafia and a hapcha, the main skafia, becomes expressed between man and his fellow. In relationships, where a person is, holds back from saying something that can offend somebody else. Talk, the faculty of talk is, I think, the most used faculty that we have, that we use today. Maybe sight as well, but sight is, the Nisayan is only in specific areas. But talking, the Nisayan is every time pretty much you open up your mouth. You have a challenge of whether to say something that's allowed to be said or something not allowed to be said. To do something that to help someone, not to help someone. But this idea of having that the love of Hashem has to be translated to a love of a fellow Jew, meaning very simple, that we have to take this message of the Rebbe, and we cannot be satisfied with ourselves. If we say Kriya Shema Shalomita, and the only thing that we're contemplating in our Cheshbon Nefesh is, did I daven ba'arichas enough? And that's a good thing, someone's doing that. That's a very good thing. Some people don't do any Cheshbon Nefesh in Kriya Shema Shalomita. At least they're doing Cheshbon Nefesh. But nonetheless, there's a deeper demanded status. And that is, it's not enough just to do a Cheshbon Nefesh, where am I holding in my Avedas Hashem? Did I go, how long did I daven? How many hours did I learn Torah? Did I do Shmir Seinayim? A Jew has to have part of his Cheshbon Nefesh. Did I do anything to offend someone? Did I say anything wrong to someone? A Jew has to be bothered by this. A Jew has to be hurt if he hurt someone. And he has to make amends if he did. There was a chassid, he's now in his 80s, one of the Chashav Rabbani Anash, who I'm close with, and I never saw, he's the epitome of an Ovid, this individual.
Where?
It doesn't matter the name, but
No,
he's both. He's living on Earth, planet Earth. And I'll never forget, he was already in his late 70s, very chashuv Rav, Rosh Yeshiva, and he called me at 11 o'clock at night after a Farbrengen. This was the first time we met. He somehow, I don't know how he got my number, he somehow got my number, and I asked him some questions of Farbrengen, and he called me, and he asked me, I think I may have said something in the Farbrengen to answer your question, which you may have gotten hurt by, so I wanted to ask for Mechila. This was a late 70s, rough. Has anyone ever had that happen to them before? Most of these people, we have our self-pride. I don't even think about what if something I said maybe offended somebody. So this is, when I saw this, this is something to really strive to. This is something a person has to try to strive to. Part of being an emistic chassid is not just enough that he puts on Rashi Rabbeinu Tam and that he goes to Chassidish Farbrengen. Unfortunately, there's a great negation or ignoring of this aspect of Avos Yisrael. Avos Yisrael is not just that you're willing to go to halfway across the world to put on tefillin with another Jew. Avos Yisrael is to the guy next door. Avos Yisrael is to your friend. Avos Yisrael is to the person in shul that you talk to. Avos Yisrael is basics everywhere.
Wife?
100%. A wife is, the Rebbe pointed out a few times, that a wife is the epitome of Avos Yisrael. A spouse is the epitome. You guys are buffering. You have to know.
Yes.
You have to learn.
Again,
Start good. Start on the right foot. Right? When you enter into a relationship of a marriage, it's not about what can I get from my spouse. What can I take? What does my spouse benefit me? The second they start leaving the toilet seat up and I always left it down, there's a little less benefit. The second I see shoes left in the middle of the way, a little less benefit. And all those little less benefits is what leads to marriage counseling. But it's a completely wrong perspective. It's a completely wrong perspective of the relationship. The relationship has to be entered into, that I am entering a relationship where now I am obliged. My focus has to be not on what are they have to do for me, but what do I have to do for them? What do I have to give the Eibishter? What do I have to give this individual? And we're a very backwards world. The Nefesh HaBahamas, what he thinks about at night is what this person did to me and what that person did to me and what I got of him, and he doesn't deserve this and he spoke to me like that and he offended me. That's the Nefesh HaBahamas' Cheshbon Nefesh. And he carries this on sometimes for days, sometimes for years. He can be offended at somebody. That's the Nefesh HaBahamas' Cheshbon Nefesh. The Nefesh Elikis Cheshbon Nefesh, which is meant to be done, if we do it properly, is we don't even think about that stuff. Forget about what they did to me. I'm irrelevant. My cheshbon nefesh, my cheshbon nefesh is that I want to make sure I didn't hurt someone. That Rosh Hashiva in his late 70s is going to call someone up at 11 o'clock at night who he doesn't know for beans. Now I'm very close with him due to the story. But that he doesn't know for beans, and ask for mechila, which he didn't defend me, by the way, but just in case that he said something, I never saw such sitka, such sensitivity, such care. And this is not something of just an individual person that I'm speaking about, but he was a Talmud of Tenchet Mimim, he was a Talmud of the Chaim Shalom Kesselman. This is the avodah that the Chassidim would demand. Of where Avos Yisrael is not just getting pictures on COL or Chabad.org that you're putting on film with someone and doing big work. That also, no one's negating that, 100%. But that is not the only definition of Avos Yisrael. And every single individual has to work in it. Every single one has to think about it. And we have to, it's one of the nishanis of life. I want to say a story that, I'll say a few short mices relating to this. An individual wrote to the Rebbe Rayatz in 1949 after the establishment of the state. And as you know, historically, the Lubavitch was never very fond of the Zionism. We were on the front of opposition. In fact, we were more opposed than Satmar, philosophically, before the establishment of the state. We were against Agudas Yisrael. And to the point that the Rebbe Rashab wrote a whole long letter forbidding speaking Hebrew. Today there are Hasidic groups, Satmar for example, who don't speak Hebrew. And they won't talk to you if you speak Hebrew. Because it's a Talmudic language. So the truth is, the Rebbe Rashab wrote a whole letter on this, saying how Lashon HaKodesh is the holy language, and it's not meant to be used as chulin, as plain talk. So he was against the Israeli state adapting, back then it wasn't yet the state, but Zionism adapting this as the official language of, the hoped Jewish state. In the end, the Rebbe Rayatz wrote that they added so many weird words to it, like refrigerator, that it's no longer Lashon HaKodesh. It's no longer Lashon HaKodesh. Ivrit is not Lashon HaKodesh anymore. The adding of all the changed words and terminologies, even though it has very similar words to Lashon HaKodesh, it's not Lashon HaKodesh. In any event, so this individual wrote to the Rebbe Rayatz, and he writes in the letter that he's happy to relate to the Rebbe Rayatz that now that the Zionist state has unfortunately stood up and been founded, he has decided to never go to Israel again until the state falls, and he's going to lose money from business dealings, and he's not going to come here anymore. That's what he wrote to the Rebbe Rayatz, and he was hoping, I guess, if I were in his shoes, I guess he was hoping to get some thumbs up from the Rebbe Rayatz. And what does the Rebbe Rayatz write to him? An amazing line. He wrote them the following. The letter is printed in, I believe, Chelik Yud Aleph, the Ger's Kodesh of the Rebbe Rayatz. He writes to him, what cheder did you go to receive such chinuch for Sinas Yisrael? So this individual must have been quite confused. I don't understand. The Rebbe Rayatz is day and night opposed to Zionism.
Rashab.
Huh?
Rebbe Rashab.
The Rebbe Rashab. This is the Rebbe Rayatz. He was also opposed. But the answer is very simple. We separate ideas from people. The fact that we are opposed to someone's philosophy, someone's ideas, this doesn't mean we're against them, chas v'shalom. A yid is a yid. And we're not against the people in general. When we begin translating opposing ideas to hatred or feelings of physical disgust, we're already on a very wrong track. The Brisker Rav,
second string.
the Menachem Porush tells over, it was published in one of the Living Torahs, that when the state was first established in 1950, person who was in the ministry. No, I can't. No, sorry. The person who I didn't. The person who was in the Ministry of Education was a Lubavitcher Chassid from Shazar. He was from lineage of a Lubavitcher family. He was a famous Lubavitcher family. His grandfather was Chassid Mara.
He didn't eat peanuts. He eat peanuts over there because what he did.
So he was elected. He was chosen. He wasn't elected. He was chosen to be part of the government of Ben Gurion, and he was the Minister of Education. And at that time, they wanted to make a law that you have to teach in the schools in Hebrew. You have to teach Hebrew in school. That's the official language of all schools. And they wouldn't allow any schools to be taught in Mamaloshon, in Yiddish. So the Brisker Rav, Zev Soloveitchik, he was very worried about this Gzeir, and he was willing to go with utter Mesiras Nefesh. They want to change the Mamaloshon, want to change the Lashon of Yidden to the Tamil, Hebrew language. That's their view. They oppose Zionism. So he heard Menachem Porush was traveling, Meir Porush's father. He was traveling to New York, and he asked him if he can go to the Rebbe Rayatz and ask the Rebbe Rayatz if he can tell Shazar to let this go. Forget about this abolition. So Menachem Porush went in 1949. He had an audience with the Rebbe Rayatz in New York, and he discussed many things with the Rebbe. And one of the things he discussed was this message that he got from Zev Soloveitchik, the Brisker Rav. He says that the Rebbe Rayatz looked at him and he said, "What, me? The Brisker Rav asked this for me?" He said, "Yes. The Brisker Rav asked if you can speak to Shazar." So the Rebbe Rayatz told him, Menachem Porush, when you land in Israel, go to Shazar and tell him that what was his last name?
Leiman.
Huh?
Moshe Leiman.
No. Last name is Shazar. Don't. His last name. No, his last name was not Shazar. That's the nickname. And anyways, he said his official, real last name. He said, "Don't let the Shazar last name in Israel embarrass the Shazar last name in Russia." That's the message that he gave over. And Menachem Porush, when he landed, he had a meeting right away with Shazar, and he told him this, and Shazar was very shaken up. And basically, the Gezeira was off. And so Menachem Porush said that people don't know the history, but the reason why today in Israel there are Yiddish-speaking schools is because of the Rebbe Rayatz intervention. The Rebbe Rayatz intervened in this. There's a chassid that was buried in this city, Shvat, by the name of Rabbi Zalman Moshe Yitzchaki. His Yartzeit was on Gimel Shvat. He was buried in Chalkas Chabad down here. He was the mentor, the mashpia of Mendel Futerfas. And he was a very unique individual. His full name was Reb Shner Zalman Moshe. Shner Zalman Moshe Yitzchaki. He was a mashpia. He was a sheichet and a mashpia of a town in Russia, of which Reb Mendel lived in. Reb Mendel became very, very close with him. And in the 1930s, he moved to, Reb Mendel was in prison, as we know, and he moved to Tel Aviv. He made Aliyah, he moved to Eretz Yisrael. He was a tremendous Oved Hashem, but he had what's called a lot of tough love. He would give a lot of tough love. He says the Nefesh HaBahamas needs some toughness. So, for example, they say that one time in the famous Binyamin Shul in Tel Aviv, during a Farbrengen, there was someone who he saw needed a little bit of roughing up, because the Nefesh HaBahamas was too tough. And in the middle of Farbrengen, he got up and he said, "You're such a sheikhet, you do this, and you do this, and you do this, and you're not even going to have a chelik and eilam haba." The person was shocked, and he began crying, hearing this from the famous mashpia, was on the Moshe. He said, "What are you crying about? You think I'm talking about you? I'm talking about Yetzer Hara." He was very tough. He was so tough, we have documented a letter that Chassidim of the Binyamin Shul Tel Aviv wrote to the Rebbe Rayatz complaining, saying, He's too tough for our generation. He's too tough for us. Please, do something. Tell him, quiet him down. He's too tough for us. And the Rebbe wrote back a whole letter about the milas of Zalman Moshe and how he's a tremendous Oved Hashem, and they should be very glad that they have him there as a mashpia, and they should learn from it. In any event, so he was quite an interesting individual. Well, there was a Maisa that happened with him, which shows that even toughness that comes from Ahavas Yisrael needs to have regulation, and how strong Ahavas Yisrael is necessitated, even in the position of mashpia, trying to better his mushpaim, to better his constituents, to better his followers. There was a Farbrengen that took place in the 1940s on Yud Tes Kislev in Binyamin Shul. It was 1946. This story I heard from a few sources, one of the sources being a great-grandson of Reb Zalman Moshe Yitzchaki, who is the Drizzen family. Avram Mayar married Reb Zalman Moshe's daughter. The Drizzens in Crown Heights are his sons, grandsons of Reb Zalman Moshe.
What? You hold to Drizzen?
All the Drizzens are grandsons of Zalman Moshe.
Oh, yeah?
They're sons of Avram Mayar, who was a son-in-law of Zalman Moshe. So it's known that in the last few years of his life, Zalman Moshe had a speech impairment. He wasn't basically he didn't Farbrengen anymore. He wasn't able to talk. He passed away in 1951, I think 1953. And you should know that there's a letter the Rebbe wrote to Avram Mayar and to his family, and the Rebbe there writes the word Zeichet Tzadik Levrachas Atzal. Very rare. Very rare. He writes that on anybody. So this Maisa, which is it's not a good Maisa, but Zalman Moshe was such a Batul Dikayid that for the purpose of we'll bring it out, I'm sure he's happy I'm saying this story, I hope. If not, I asked him Mechila. It's kind of, he's right down there. But his grandchildren saying the story, I'm sure they got the go ahead to give the message over. So there was a Farbrengen taking place at Yud Tes Kislev, and there was a chassid there whose name was Avram Chen. Avram Chen, he was the son of Radatz Chen, Reb David Tzvi Chen. Reb David Tzvi Chen was the son of Reb I forgot his first name, but he was a famous chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek. He was a famous chassid of the Tzemach Tzedek and of the Mikveh Rebbe, opinion. In any event, No, that's someone else. Their Kechem is a different, that's someone from recent.
More recent.
Yeah. So, the Radatz, his son was Avram, and his son was a Lubavitcher, but he was, he came to Israel, he became more towards Zionism, he was a little bit more modernized. And so he was speaking Yud Tes Kislev, and one of these speakers said over a certain Maisa by the Farbrengen. And Rav Avram, he said over a certain miracle that happened with the Alter Rebbe, like a certain nace that, Ruach HaKodesh, whatever it was. We don't know what it was, but whatever it was, he said over. And Rav Avram Chen said, yeah, but it's not really a miracle. He basically explained it according to nature, how it could have happened. It really wasn't a miracle. So Zalman Moshe was not in the Farbrengen yet. He would only join much later. He was still in the middle of davening. And he basically jumped onto the table, and he did something to this chassid. He did something to him. He spilled something on him. In protest, so to say. He was middle of davening, but in protest of what he said, to try to diminish the sanctity, the sanctity or the miraculous nature of the Alter Rebbe with some kind of, intellectual explanation. So this story got back to the Rebbe Rayatz. So this is what they say. And the Rebbe Rayatz said, if so, it's better that he no longer talk. It's better that he no longer be mashpia. And this is the Messiah of the story. That his speech ailment occurred as a result of this action that he took in a Farbrengen to a person who, between you and me, was deserving of it. But nonetheless, it embarrassed another Jew. And the Rebbe Rayatz despite his greatness, and he was a tremendous, as the Rebbe called him a tzaddik, he was a tremendous, great chassid, but even there's a regulation and a limitation. A person shouldn't think that in the name of Chassidus, he can break the barriers of proper conduct between him and another fellow Jew. Even if the other fellow Jew is saying something which in our books we can use as heretical or as maskil, and which was the circumstances here. But nonetheless, this is something that a Jew has to be permeated with, and Avos Yisrael is translated right here in the room. How a person speaks to someone, how a person acts with someone, and not what did this person do to me, but what did I do to him. And when Yidden in general have that attitude, a lot less people will get into fights and will get offended. As if the attitude is always not what did he do to me, but what did I do to him, then we will be more careful in how we say things and how we do things. Reb Mendel once told over a story of his mashpia. It's on the Moshe. This was in the 1920s, the Farbrengen that was taking place in Russia. It was Zalman Moshe was there, and the Futafas was there, and the Rebbe Rayatz called Zalman Moshe, middle of Farbrengen, the Rebbe called Zalman Moshe over to tell him something. And everyone's looking at the Rebbe Rayatz, talking to Zalman Moshe for a few minutes, and Zalman Moshe is just he's looking at him petrified and just nodding. He went back after, and Mendel asked him, what did the Rebbe Rayatz tell you? And he said, believe me, I was so busy thinking about, Rebbe, please take your eyes off this piece of schmutz that I couldn't even understand one word he said. This was Zalman Moshe. This is the individual. No, those that still have the chaim, those that still have a little bit of juice left. Finished everything.
Good circulation department, one newspaper left in the box. Good circulation, one newspaper left.
One newspaper left. Right. New, Bostoners, why don't you give us a niggun from Boston? What's the last name? Leibowitz. Machen a niggun from Boston. A Boston a niggun.
Yeah.
New York? You?
I'm living in the States.
There's water in there?
Born in Manhattan. With Manhattan. Brooklyn, Yo, in of town. Everything is good. I think dead. 90%. But
Chaim.
Finally,
Leibowitz, Chaim. Maybe you zeicha to be makusha for the Rabbi, makusha to the Rabbi, which translates, right? To be makusha is easy words to say, but that it translated, first of all, baruchnius. The main thing is not money, and it's not nachas, and it's not health. The main thing is that we should have spiritual health, which is we should get out of our galus panimi, our inner exile. When we get out of our inner exile, then we can get out of our outside exile. As the Rebbe said in his famous Sikha of 28th of Nisan, Asur kol asher b'yicholtechem. But the main thing is ikr that were found in the galus panimi. So being connected to the Rebbe helps gives us the channel that we can explore and reveal our neshama in love of Hashem, love of the Jew, and love of the Torah.
Amen.
take this up a little bit there.
Where were you?
Could be.
What? Where? Yeah, it is it.